Hello and good morning. Today we are talking about forgiveness. I know you don't think forgiveness is like a topic of the day, but it is today. Today we are reading from the insights and wisdom of Omuugn. And today the topic that we're going to unpack and kind of filter through item by item is forgiveness. And the reason this is really important is because many of us think that we need to be forgiven. But lo and behold, many of us actually need to do the forgiving. And so today we're going to talk about both sides of that forgiveness coin. And with me, I have Omuugn. So please help me welcome Omuugn as we discover how to forgive. How are you today?
I'm actually wonderful. Beautiful, crisp spring day in Eastern Oregon. It's getting down into the 30s at night still, and our highs are in the high 60s and low 70s. So it's just a really beautiful springtime of the year.
That sounds like the funnest time to sit here with a book and to learn some self-help things that will make us better people. So forgiveness, this is a really heavy-duty topic. And I'm curious why you added forgiveness to the book.
Well, I was doing some research on all of the different traits and characteristics that make us who we are. And forgiveness is one of those characteristics. So it's an element in our genetics that make us as individuals who we are, how we respond to life and the situations that develop. So it's just part of our nature that needs to be explored a little bit. As Christians, and it goes beyond Christianity, in the Islamic world, in the world of India and the different religious persuasions, forgiveness is really a part of all of those traditions. In Christianity, we're familiar with some of the biblical things like forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, or you should forgive people 70 times 7, or Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. And that's basically the foundation of forgiveness and why we relate to it, I guess. There are so many people who do things that don't know what they do.
Well, I'm one of those people. I went to church every Sunday and I kept hearing the words repent. So I think part of repentance is you ask for forgiveness, but I didn't know what to ask for forgiveness for. Like I wasn't consciously doing anything that I felt I needed to be forgiven of. So how does one know that they actually need to be forgiven?
Well, there are two aspects to forgiveness, at least two aspects. One is when we damage someone else emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, physically, whatever that might be, and they become offended because of what we have done. And then there are people who do those things to us. And we have feelings of anger and resentment and anxiety and all different kinds of things associated with that experience. So forgiveness is that twofold reality where if we have done something to someone, that needs to be remedied. And if someone has done something to us, we need to have a way of processing that remedy. Because sometimes people won't come to us and say, I'm really sorry for what happened. They will offend us and just go on their way. And it leaves us with an unforgiveness in our spirit. So there are a lot of different elements, and we'll talk about some of those today.
There was a moment in my life where I decided I committed to forgiveness. I said, okay, I'm going to do the forgiveness thing. And so I made a backdoor deal with God, and I do not recommend you do this. Okay, this was the wrong way to go about forgiveness, but I made a deal with God. I said, okay, I'm gonna forgive, and I'm gonna ask for forgiveness for all the wrongs that I've ever committed. I'm gonna do this. Well, lo and behold, suddenly people that had disappeared from my life 10 years ago started showing up again, and they started showing up in the most inconvenient places. And example, I went to the mall and a guy opened the door for me and I said, thank you. And I turned and it was this person that I had gotten in a fight with like 10 years ago. And I was like, oh no, I made a commitment that I was going to forgive and be forgiven. And here's my opportunity. And I was going to hurry through the door and pretend like I didn't recognize him. And then I stopped and I was like, if I'm really growing up, then I have to do this. So it was so uncomfortable. I'm standing there in the door of the mall like, hey, I recognize you. And last time we talked, we got in a big fight and we left things in an awkward situation. And now you're opening the door for me 10 years later, and I think I should apologize. And everybody that I had forgotten about, like I forgot about fights that I got in, and then lo and behold, these people just start popping up like woodwork, waiting to be forgiven. And I'm like, this is so awkward. So I don't recommend doing it that way because it was like a whole summer of awkward moments.
Well, what you bring up is a good point, and that is that unforgiveness is baggage.
Mm.
And either the other person carries the baggage, or you carry the baggage, or both of you carry the baggage. Sometimes, if we have offended someone, we're not aware of their processing, whether they have forgiven us or whether they haven't, unless they've communicated with us. But if we're aware that we have wronged someone, it's baggage that we carry.
Mm.
And sometimes we have a tendency to push that baggage to the back of the baggage carrier, but we're still carrying that baggage around. And in fact, I heard an older gentleman one time, he was in a situation and he said, I will never forgive that person.
Mm.
I mean, that's the attitude. And if you don't do that, then you carry that baggage forever. And after a while, if you keep accumulating baggage, it's heavier and heavier to carry. Pretty soon, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions are always in a turmoil because you really can't find peace and tranquility because of all of the baggage that you're carrying. So it's important to, first of all, identify if we have wronged someone and we're aware of it. We should go to that person and say, I did this, or I said this, or whatever, and I didn't mean it. I was out of sorts. Would you forgive me? And I feel really badly about it, and I will do whatever I can to rectify the situation. If you've stolen something, it needs to be returned, maybe with a little bit of interest or something better. We need to do something that really, forgiveness is associated with that repentance. And repentance is identifying, restoring, bringing everything into balance and communication, and where there's free energy flowing between people instead of blockages, because there's so many situations that stop energy from flowing. And in its ultimate sense, forgiveness is not the words that we say, but it's a resonant frequency that comes out of us. And the resonant frequency is harmonious, and it blends with things according to law. For example, there's a law that states that for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. There's a law of attraction. So if you do something nice, if you forgive someone, there's more of a tendency for people to forgive you. And energy flows in those situations according to universal law. So we don't want to block the flow of that energy. And repentance is a resonant frequency. And we have to be in tune to what we're resonating. We have to feel the peace. We have to feel the release of that baggage.
And how do you do that?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to do that. I'm
But
sure
if we're not using words and we're going to switch to a resonant frequency, let's say that this is my first day of forgiveness and I am amateurish at it. And so I would like to switch the resonant frequency. How do I do that?
Well, like I say, it depends on whether you have offended someone else or whether you're offended. Either way, in the final result, you have to learn to forgive yourself. You're the one who's responsible for the baggage that you carry. And there are techniques to do that, actually. One of them is simply to sit down and kind of go through your life processes, how you interact with people, how honest you are, how you have disciplined someone. Say you discipline a child and your discipline was too harsh, and your child is going to be traumatized by that discipline. So if you sit down and you become aware of things, that's one way of doing that. It's called mindfulness, and where you're aware of the people around you, aware of situations, aware of how you're speaking and your tone of voice and all kinds of things, because you might be offending people all of the time just with your tone of voice or your posture. They say that 80% of communication is nonverbal. So there are a lot of ways that we interact with people non-verbally. And a lot of times, most of the time, we're not aware of that. We're not aware of how we really affect other people unless they tell us. So that's one of the techniques. Another technique is called EMDR, which is utilizing the bilateral movements of the eyes while you're concentrating on a particular thing. And it brings up memories, and once your memory is brought up, then you can deal with it, because a lot of things are operating on the subconscious level, and we don't really deal with those things very often. But our subconscious mind is reviewing our entire belief system every few seconds. And so if you want to make a change in how your subconscious mind processes, then you need to bring up specific things and give your subconscious mind specific instructions on how to deal with those things. And EMDR is one way to do that. Another one is called the emotional freedom technique, or EFT, and where you actually tap on meridians of the body while you're processing some situation that you're trying to get rid of the baggage. And it will bring up baggage, and it will give you a deeper insight into those things. And then by acknowledging what you've done and resolving to resolve that issue in your characteristic, then that baggage is released and the energy begins to flow again. And the energy, according to Chinese medicine especially, flows through meridians of the body, and there are different channels through which energy flows. And in the Western world, we have allopathic medicine where we just take a pill for everything. And that does not allow the energy to flow. And if we have a blockage, that blockage is baggage that we're carrying. And what we want to do is to release that. We want the energy just to flow freely. And so by tapping on certain points with certain ideas in our mind, it rewires the brain. It creates new neurological pathways, and your baggage is released, and you feel the energy flowing, and you can actually feel the change of your resonant frequency. That's how you know that it's changed. If you still feel frustrated or anxious or any of the negative emotions, you know that there's baggage, or there's something behind those feelings that's causing you to feel that way.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a situation where I had a business partner in my early 20s that caused a lot of angst, and I thought I had forgiven them, and I didn't. Every time I had a nightmare, that person would come back in my dream and haunt me. And for years, I thought I had forgiven them, and yet I had not. And so I really focused on how do I let go? Because like you said, I was carrying a baggage that was so bitter, and it made me so angry that even though I said the words, I forgive you, and even though I thought I had forgiven, I hadn't. I was still carrying at an unconscious level, hate, if you will. I mean, it was a visceral feeling. I was so angry every time I would think about it because I hadn't processed that at a frequency level yet because I didn't know. I guess this conversation is like 40 years too late for me. I mean, I'm a few years behind. I wish I'd learned all these things, but it was a conscious thing that I was carrying with me that made me just angry every time I thought about it.
Yeah, you have to have you have to have some way of processing that. Another way that's very effective for a lot of people is the Tai Chi, or
Mhm.
the gentle body movements. If you have something in mind that you're trying to change in your nature, and you combine that with breathing and with body movements, there's something that ties the spirit and the body and the soul and all of your aspects together. And when you're sort of unified in doing that, again, it releases the baggage and the energy flows, and you feel the peace and tranquility. There are different types of yoga, for example. Uh, if you do concentrated yoga, if you're working on some issue while you're doing yoga, that also is a release. And there's a thing called uh, it'll come to me in a second. Falun Dafa.
Mm.
Falun Dafa is putting your body in certain positions, like your arms stretched out as far as you can stretch them, and then you stretch them a little bit further and hold it for like 3 seconds, and then you relax. And
Mm.
there's a way of tensing your muscles and then relaxing that allows the energy to flow through your body. There's massage therapy, there's acupressure, there's acupuncture. There's all different types of techniques that open up the flow of energy in your body, and every person needs to sort of find out what's best for them, what works for them. And maybe you can try different things, and maybe what you think works, something else would work better.
There were
Yeah.
actually 2 things that I tried that worked for me over the years as I tried to figure out how to forgive. The first one was writing. I would literally take a yellow notepad and an ink pen, and it was different than if I used the computer. This, I had to use my hand, I had to write, it was connected to my brain somehow. And I would sit there and I would write out the scenario. I am angry with so and so because of, and I would spell out all the reasons why I was angry. And then in the process of connecting with the pen, it kind of unleashed my unconscious mind. Well, why are you angry? Why did that upset you? And I'm writing the questions as well as the answers. And so it was kind of like I was finding answers as I was writing the questions. So, how do you think this person feels about the situation? Have you talked to the person about the situation? Have you tried to remedy the situation? What would you do differently if the situation were to present itself again? And kind of working through some of those questions and answers on paper. And I found that to be very helpful because instead of just spitting out complaints, my mind then connected to questions and answers. And I started to be able to recognize some answers in my own thought process. The second one was I would sit down because I don't sit very still very long. It's not my nature. But I would sit there and I would try to imagine that person walking through a door. And what is my energy towards this person when they walk through a door? And so let's say that you were the person that upset me. You're not, but let's in this example say you were. I would imagine you walking through the door. How do I feel about you in this moment? And then I would say, oh, look, hey, there's my dad. And then I would get up and I would run, go give you a big hug. And did the hug feel genuine? And there are times that I try to hug this one person in my head over and over and over again, and they just kept pushing me away. It wasn't authentic. It didn't feel natural. And I kept thinking to myself, when I am able to hug them and it's a real genuine hug, like they really mean it, and it's both of us are feeling that, then I will think that they have been forgiven. And I couldn't find myself in that situation. Every time I would imagine them walking through a room, there was no genuine hug. Then one time I was in a place where the person did in fact walk through the room. And I've been doing this over and over and over for weeks. Finally, when I saw the person and they walked in, I went up and I gave them a genuine hug, and it was actually a genuine hug. And I was like, yes, I think it worked. But those are my simple ways of trying to learn to forgive.
Uh, they're both interesting ways. One thing on the writing, we have two hemispheres to our brain. And if we're right-handed, we have a tendency to operate out of the left side of our brain. And so if you're writing down those responses to your questions with your right hand, you're getting the information from the left side of your brain. And so if you will take and begin to respond to those same questions and write the answers with your left hand, you begin to access the opposite side of your brain. And the two sides of our brain store things differently. The right side of the brain is more the emotional, spatial ideas, and the left side is more of the analytical, thought processes that we do in our conscious thinking. So if you write with both hands, you're going to get a lot more information, and it will be more meaningful to you, and you might discover things that you wouldn't that way. The second example that you gave is a good example that our subconscious mind doesn't really differentiate between what we actually experience and what we visualize experiencing. And so if we have been traumatized in some way, we have a tendency to go back over that in our mind, and it re-traumatizes us all of the time. It keeps us in that state of anxiousness and maybe anger, maybe unforgiveness, whatever that might be. And like you say, if you create a different scenario, visualize that person in a different way, visualize the experiencing turning out like you would have preferred it to turn out, putting a positive aspect to that experience, then that's the way your subconscious mind will begin to process it. And after a while, see, whatever you energize is going to be your reality. And if you keep re-energizing a negative thing, you're bringing that negative thing into your reality. Whereas if it's sort of like, are you concentrating on the problem or the solution to the problem? Mm-hmm. If you're always concentrating on solutions, you're always in a different aspect of how to deal with that problem. But if you're just looking at the problem, it becomes a blockage and an obstacle and something really negative. So instead of problems, we have opportunities to think differently and to explore creative ways of looking at things, developing different perspectives. How does someone else look at this? Or what would be the ideal way to look at this? That's what I tried to do in the book when I pulled up something like forgiveness, utilizing scripture and wisdom literature through the ages. What would be the ideal thing in forgiveness? What would be the ideal thing in every characteristic and every trait? And what we want to sort of move toward is creating ourselves in all of our traits. That's the science of epigenetics, turning genetic switches on and off, because our individuality is expressed by which genes are active in our bodies. And so by visualizing something positive and something creative, you create new neural programming in your brain and new ways of your subconscious mind to process that information. And you create for yourself a different reality, a reality that you would prefer to experience. So
when you speak about realities that you prefer, I think in the back of all of our minds, and I say all of our minds, I think it's a human wiring that we want approval from family members. We want our family to love and accept us for who we are without us having to jump through all kinds of magical hoops. And I found myself in a situation with some family members that really brought me angst every single time I thought about it. And it was a long, ongoing, bungled relationship that was never going to correct itself. And whether they were a part of it, I may never know, but I was a part of it. And it's something that ate me alive every day. Every day I would focus on how I had failed at trying to win their approval, if you will. And I was trying to work through it because like what part of my character is so weak that I have to win their approval? Like what is that I'm dealing with? And I came to, you talk about changing perspective. The only way I could really work through that, because I spent years trying to work through it, and I fumbled it every time. When I finally realized I'm related to these people, and I have mysteriously been calling them my family, but I realized my family is a compilation of friends that I've met. It's a compilation of some relatives, and it's a compilation, oddly enough, of some strangers that have come through my life. And for whatever reason, I've attached myself to them. I'm like, that person's my family. I'd go to the end of the earth for this perfect stranger that I just met. So what is it that this family member is holding over me? And I realized they're not my family at all. These people are merely my relatives. These people are related to me, and that's it. That's all this may ever be. And there are 7.5 billion people on the planet, and it is possible that I'm not going to get approval from two of them. Are you okay with that? And I was like, yes, I'm okay with that. Okay, so these are your relatives. You must be nice to them. You must be polite. You must be respectful. You must send greeting cards at the holidays or whatever. If you see them, you must be civil. Beyond that, you have no obligation. These are your relatives. And the minute that I said, oh, they're not my family, they're my relatives, it was like lifting this huge burden of expectation. Like they owed me their approval and I was going to jump to the end of the earth until I got it or whatever. Finally, I was like, oh, I can stop trying to win their approval because I may never get it. That's okay. Just be polite, be respectful, the end. And after that, it was like I never looked back. It was like ripping off this huge gorilla suit that I've been wearing. Like, whew, that was hot and sweaty, and I'm done with that, you know?
Well, you just opened up a whole Pandora's box of things that need to be explored. Family is something that you're biologically intertwined with.
Mhm.
You have the same DNA as all of your siblings. You have different genetics that are switched on and off, which gives all of you your individual traits and characteristics.
Mhm.
I have this idea, and it's just my idea, and we're talking about my book, so my idea is pertinent.
This is your idea. Share it with us.
I have this idea that there's no accident that we're in the families that we're in.
Mhm.
We've come to this earth in this experience that we're having, and the people that are part of our family, they contain lessons that we need to learn and lessons that we need to process. And so if you have a sibling that you're having a real challenge with, that should be explored from a lot of different perspectives. What lessons do you need to learn? What lessons can you learn? What lessons should you learn? And like you say, you may come to a point where you say, well, I've learned the lesson, but I don't have the relationship that I prefer. And what we find is that a lot of times everyone makes assumptions. We make assumptions because we don't have the full spectrum of facts to work with. And so we will take bits and pieces of information and pull together our perspective of things. And we make assumptions about that perspective. And then that becomes part of our belief system. And sometimes your assumption about somebody else is interacting with their assumption of you. And so we have two assumptions that are all assumptions are incorrect on some level because you don't have all of the information. So a lot of relationship problems stem from the fact that your assumption of them is dealing with their assumption of you, and the real people are not really communicating. And so we need we had a session on communication, but we actually need to sit down with people, and it's hard to do sometimes because some people are not willing to sit down and really communicate with you. And if they're not, then you have to create that scenario that we just talked about, where you visualize sitting down with them and having the conversation and taking both parts and creating the scenario that you prefer. And that's the information that's fed into your subconscious mind, and it will become part of your belief system and your reality. But ideally, we would be able to sit down with people and share our feelings. This is not your assumption that you're talking to, your assumption of me. This is me. For example, I have some children who, they may see me a certain way. We've been separated by miles. I have children that live in Maine and North Carolina and Texas and Michigan, and they're all over the place. And we have a tendency to remember people the last time we saw them or at earlier times, without realizing that people are changing all of the time. I'm not the same person that I was when I was 20. I've learned a lot of things. I've inculcated new perspectives, and I've worked on traits and characteristics. And my belief system is very different than it used to be. And some of my children look at me as though I used to be, and they don't see me for who I am. And so periodically we need to sit down with people and update everybody and say, this is who I really am. I've learned some new things. If you're holding a grudge against me because of something I said in the past, you need to realize that, first of all, I probably didn't intend to harm you or hurt your feelings. If I did, it was subconscious and I was not aware of it. But I'm not the same person who said that. And if we were to interact the same way today, I would probably interact with you differently because I've learned some new things. My belief system has changed. And it would be nice if you could see me for who I am becoming, rather than living in the past and remembering me who I was maybe 30 or 40 years ago. So there are a lot of things in this mix that we need to stay on top of. And family is one of them. It's hard to let family go for me because they're the lessons that we need to learn.
Well, and I think it comes back to the perspective. You talked about changing your perspective. And for me, changing my perspective was like the fly that tries to fly through the window. And he flies to the glass and he smacks up against the glass and he falls down. He gets up and he tries to fly through the window again, smacks into the glass and falls down on the ledge. And he does it over and over and over and over again. And yet there's an open door about 6 feet away. He could just fly right outside through the open door. But because his perspective is so focused on getting out through the glass that he keeps doing the same thing over and over and over again, and he's not making any progress. And he just keeps banging himself into the glass. And that was me. I kept doing the same thing over and over and over again until I changed my perspective. And as soon as I changed my perspective and I realized there's an open door over here, I was able not only to get around the hurdles that for me was I was wanting their approval. And when I gave up that need and I said, you know what, it doesn't matter if I get their approval or not, I'm going to be the best version of myself. And if they like that, that's okay. And if they don't, no harm, no foul. I don't need to control the way they feel about me. And the minute I did that, the minute I ripped off that suit and I said, hey, you know what, I'm done playing this game, all of a sudden the dynamic between us changed. The perspective changed. The way that I was able to interact with them changed because I was different. They weren't different. They were the very same person. I was different. And it changed the way that I interacted with them, which has dynamically shifted our relationship over a period of time. It did not happen instantaneously, but it happened over a period of time. And as I've watched this whole 360 now, it's been a really interesting evolution that I think now I do have their approval. But it was not because I was trying to get it. It's because I let go of it. And I said, that's not my goal anymore. And when I gave up my perspective, the whole relationship shifted a little bit. And so I love the fact that you bring up changing your perspective. Sometimes it's not something that they're going to do, but it's something that we do. It's work that we do internally and we do it for ourselves that then shifts the dynamics of the relationship.
Yeah, there are a lot of different pathways we could go down here. And you bring up a lot of really, really good points. One of them is that we should be genuine. But genuine has its limits also. In other words, it might be genuine that I feel angry, but I shouldn't feel angry. I should feel controlled, and I should manage my anger rather than letting my anger control me. And so it's good to be genuine, but we want to be genuine in the way that we should be genuine. And if we're working on those traits and those qualities, that's okay. We shouldn't assume that we're something that we're not. And like you say, also, we can't control how other people feel. We can't control what their perspective is or what their assumption will be. So you have to be yourself. You have to be genuine, but you want that to be the best version of yourself. And you want that to be a real version of you. You don't want to pretend to be something you're not. You want to inculcate the qualities that would give you that characteristic. So instead of pretending to be honest, just be honest. Let that be your goal and the best version of yourself. And you can't control what other people think, how they feel, how they respond, unless you actually get a hold of them and sit them down and say, we need to communicate. I know I had a couple of experiences. I have experiences all the time where I offend people. They will say, you say that I always do this, but I don't always do that. And I will say, you're right. That's just a form of expression that I use. You don't always do this. And what you do normally all of the time is the right thing. But once in a while, you will do this thing that bothers me. And I will accentuate that in a way that's maybe offensive to you because you rarely do that. So we need to sit down with people and say, I'm not trying to offend you in any way. I'm trying to express how I feel about something, and I'm probably not doing a very good job at it. That's why you're feeling a negative energy. I don't mean that at all. I'm trying to communicate something that will be beneficial in our relationship, but I'm not doing a very good job of it because I don't have the experience, or I haven't learned some of the lessons yet. And I've learned not to say certain things. I can still be genuine, but I need to learn to rephrase my questions. I need to rephrase my responses to things so that people are uplifted and encouraged and feel a positive energy rather than a negative energy. And
And it's
so,
interesting you bring that up because when you talk about being the best version of yourself, I know that sometimes I'm perceived as being intimidating. I get this a lot from my staff. They're like, "Oh, you're so intimidating." And so going out of my way, where I'm a quick person to say, "Did you get this particular item taken care of?" That's my thought process. And one of my staff members will stop and say, "Hello, how are you today?" instead of answering my question. And it catches me and makes me realize, oh, I didn't make small talk. Let me stop and say, "Hello, how are you today?" And then I can say, "Did you get that thing taken care of?" So when people are bringing to our attention, we can do something about that. And so I've gone out of my way to make small talk before I then say what I actually want to say, only so that I will come off as not being so harsh or so intimidating. And then also, if I'm texting something, my text is a bullet point. Did you get this taken care of? And then I will add a little emoji with like a little heart emoji or a thumbs up or something like that to try to add a little bit of softness. So it's not so like, right at you, you know? And I think that's intentional to try to stave off those hard feelings that we generate without even meaning to. And I know that so often I just come off as like, right in your face. And that's not my intention at all. That's just who I am. And so, yes, I want to be genuine, but at the same time, I'm going out of my way at this phase of my life to try to like make little bits of small talk and sending emojis and things like that to try to make it more pleasant for the other person.
But
Well,
a lot of times we don't really put a thought process into how we communicate. For example, if I say, "Did you get this done?" It sort of puts them on trial.
mhm,
They failed or they succeeded, and they have to defend themselves.
mhm,
But if you rephrase the question and you said, "We're working on this project, and I was trying to get a current update on how this project is going," then you can get more of a feedback, and the person is not being judged on whether it was done or not done. Sometimes my wife will say, "I need this project done," and I'll interact with her several hours later, and she'll say, "Did you do this project?" Well, I haven't done it yet, but it's on my list to do.
mm,
And I feel guilty because I didn't get it done, and I'm put on the defensive. And it's just a way that we need to learn to communicate that's always positive, always encouraging. We want energy to flow freely, and that's what draws people together. Like you
mhm,
say, sometimes with family that doesn't happen, but with friends it does, with other associates. And they don't really become family, but they become a close organization that you're part of. It's a group of people who are bound together like a club or a church group or a business group or whatever it might be. You're tied in with positive energy to this group of people. For example, I have some friends, and I have some areas that I really enjoy researching. For example, multidimensional energy and over unity energy and those types of things. And there are people that I cannot talk to those about those things with, but there I have friends that I can.
mhm.
So there are a lot of people that I'm closer to in certain situations, and they're closer to me than my own family, and I can share ideas and what I'm processing. My family is still my family, and I have to communicate with them in a way that I don't offend them. There's certain things that I've found that I should not talk about. I see things a certain way from my experience and what I've learned. They don't share that experience and they haven't learned the same lesson. And so if I give them this information, it's offensive to them.
Mm.
And so I have to be very, very careful. It's sort of
I,
like,
I call what you're talking about big cup, little cup. And my philosophy is, and I felt this way for a very long time, when you're talking to someone, if you have a big cup of wisdom and there's a person that only has a little cup of wisdom, for example, you're a dad and you have lived for many decades. But let's say that your grandson comes up to you and he has a little cup of wisdom because he's a very small person and he hasn't advanced in years yet. He hasn't been through the same life's experiences that you have. And so if you were to pour out your great big cup of wisdom into his little cup, it would like spill over the side and it would like leak around because he doesn't have a way to hold that information. And so a big cup, little cup, you have to pay attention to the person that you're speaking to and the type of wisdom that they have. And so if they haven't had the life's experiences, there are certain things you just would not share out of common knowledge because they have no bucket to put that in or they have no way to process that information. And so just being aware that, hey, this is a big cup, little cup situation. The person that I'm speaking with, like when I speak to you, you have a much larger cup than mine. And so while I say, hey, tell me all the wisdom, sometimes I don't have the capacity to actually understand or experience at the same level you do. And one of the things that I've become really keen on is, like, for example, you are my dad, and you'll always be so many years older than me. And if I race really fast and I try to catch up with you and I catch up with you in age, by the time I'm your age, you will be that many years older. So you will still always be a generation ahead of me. And so it's kind for me when I'm talking to other people and they're not getting it. I'm like, you're not understanding what I'm saying. It'd be really easy for me to want them to understand what I understand at my level, but they're not there. They're 20, 30 years younger. And I have this all the time with employees. There's a generation gap between me and that other person. Big cup, little cup. What I'm trying to espouse on them, they're not going to get because they don't have the capacity to understand just yet because they haven't been through those lessons yet. And so I have to understand there's just a generation gap, and they may never see eye to eye with me because there will always be either an experience or an age gap that just that's just the way it is. And I have to be okay saying, wait a second, this is a big cup, little cup scenario. And so whether I'm the little cup or I'm the big cup in that scenario, I got to pay attention that it's not two cups of the same size. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we need to realize at the same time that, yeah, you'll never catch up with me chronologically. But as far as technologically and what you're doing in your business and how you're adapting to new software and new things that are coming out, you surpass me in a lot of areas. You have the big cup and I have the little cup in some areas. And we need to be aware of that. So that one thing that I have found is really helpful is that if someone asks me a question about something, I know that they're interested in that or they wouldn't have asked the question. Instead, so that opens up the communication between us, and now I have something to share with them. If I go up to somebody and I say, let me tell you about styro aircrete. It's a new building material. And I'm building my raised beds and my flower pots out of this. They probably have no interest at all in what I'm saying. And everything I'm saying is just bypassing them. So we have to be careful on the information that we share with people, because we can offend people by giving them something that either they don't want or they're not ready for or whatever that might be. We don't want to offend people. And if we're kind of aware of other people and what they're thinking, and we get that by their feedback when they ask us questions, when they talk about things, then we know about what things to talk about, and we can amplify the conversations by weaving our threads in with their threads and making this a productive thing. We don't want to beat people over the head with what we've learned or with our experiences. That offends people, and that gives us something that we need to ask forgiveness about. And we can put baggage on them, or they can put baggage on us, or we can put baggage on ourselves. We have to learn to forgive ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We need to learn to be careful on how we interact with other people so that we're not offensive. And we don't want people to have to forgive us for everything that we say or do, because that's not our intent. So,
And I think intent is the key. You brought up intent a couple of times, and I want to talk about that for a second so it doesn't slip by us. I think when you are around someone frequently, you understand the intent of their heart. Like, I know you, and I know you well enough to know that you would never harm me intentionally. You would never harm anyone intentionally. I know that about you. And so if you did something that was harmful, I have to stop and say, well, that's really out of character. I'm sure he didn't mean it that way because that's not his character. That's not who he is. And so understanding the intent of someone's heart, I think, goes a long way, where there are people that will literally take something that you said, and maybe you said the wrong word, or you said something in a way that maybe you were feeling stressed by something else and it came out too harsh or something. And they're like, you spouted off at me, but I understand the intent of your heart. You would never spout off at anyone on purpose. There must be something else going on. And I think understanding the intent of someone's heart is really a big key when it comes to forgiveness, because there are people that would never intentionally harm us. And yet we hold them responsible and we hold them at trial for something that they don't even remember saying, or they didn't mean it that way. And because it came off that way, we're like, I'm never going to forgive you, like the person you talked about. What is that?
well, you bring up a good point, and we need to emphasize it again. And that is, we need to forgive everyone. Forgiveness needs to be one of our qualities, one of our characteristics. We don't want to carry any baggage. We don't want to carry negative emotions. We want everything just to flow freely. And there are ways to do that. We've talked about some of the techniques. We need to find a way that we can release things. We want to interact with people in a really, really positive way. For example, I have some neighbors who are of a different religious persuasion than I, and their objective is to convert me to their persuasion. And
How's that going?
well, I mean, I have my own belief system, and I believe in things that they don't believe in. I believe in the way the spirit works and the way the divine works. I have a relationship with deity, and I interact a certain way, and I'm comfortable with what I know and what I've experienced. And so I have to be really careful when I talk with them because they're my neighbors, and I don't want to offend them. I don't want to be a bad neighbor or anything like that. And so I try to find things that we can talk about that are positive. And I even ask them religious questions sometimes just to get their perspective on things and how they look at things. I don't have to look at them the same way, but it's good for me to understand how they think and how, what they're processing. So we have to find a way to live with people in a non-confrontational way so that life is smooth and energy flows and we encourage each other, and we don't want to pick bones with people and fight over things and argue about things. People are arguing whether the world is round or whether it's flat. Well, the fact is, you go out and you stand and you look up and you really don't know if the earth is flat or round, because all you know is what you experience. And then people will tell you, they'll say, well, the evidence is that the earth is round. And some will say, well, the evidence is the earth is flat. And if you examine the evidence, you can look at things a lot of different ways. Everyone has to do that for themselves. You can't tell somebody else what they should believe or how they should believe. You want to make everything available, information available, what you've learned, if they're interested in that area. If they're not, maybe you don't want to go there. Some things are just offensive to people.
I know when you're talking about things that are offensive, I spent a good part of my youth being angry, and I had anger management issues when I moved away from home. And I remember there was a year, it was 1994. There was a year where I decided I had reached my maximum anger limit. And I decided I didn't like who I was as a person. And so I couldn't forgive people because I didn't have forgiveness in my heart to give. I couldn't love people because I didn't have love in my heart to give. And so I decided for me, I had to give up the anger. I had to focus for 1 year. I was going to focus on not getting angry. And I didn't know what that looked like. But I realized that because of my lifestyle, it was like I was a drama addict. I needed that anger in my life in order to keep going. It was like a drug. And so I went to the movies one night, and the movie Independence Day had just come out. And I decided that I would go to the movie and I would pay my $5. And at the time, the tickets were $5. It was a lot of money for me back then. But I was going to go watch the whole world blow up and fire and brimstone and all the things, but I wasn't going to bring it back with me. I was going to experience that fix that I needed without getting in a fight with someone. There was going to be no yelling and screaming. There's going to be nothing that I had to ask for forgiveness for. At the end of the movie, all of my relationships would still be intact. And I took myself to the movie. I sat in the movie. I watched the fire and brimstone. I watched everything blow up. They took my $5. And at the end, I was like, yes, I did it. I got my drama fix. All my relationships were still intact. I didn't fight with anybody. There was nothing to repair when I was done. And I walked out of the movie theater and no one was the wiser. But I spent an entire year focusing on what are those hot buttons and those triggers that people will say something or do something, and I get really angry and really offended. How do I let go of that? And it was a really interesting year. We won't talk about it today, but it was a really interesting year because it put me face to face with my biggest fears, my biggest flaws, and the things that triggered the biggest anxieties in my life. And it was in that moment that I realized I do have a problem. And it's not everyone around me, it's actually my problem. And I'm 100% responsible for how I react in these situations. And if I want to go through my life and not end up in prison for life because I did something really stupid, it's got to stop right now. And in order to kind of monitor that, I ended up getting a heart monitor and I wore it. And every time that I would get really angry or upset, it would set off the heart monitor, which was an audible cue that like beep, 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 like your heart is racing and you're upset now. And then I would put on a pair of running shoes and I would go outside and I would like pound it out on the pavement as hard as I could because me running and letting that steam off, if you will, prevented me from like punching somebody's lights out. So I learned to rechannel that energy while I was learning to recognize it. And so it was really an interesting year for me. But on the other end of it, it's so much easier to learn to manage your emotions than it is to try to repair and ask for forgiveness every time you screw up with somebody, you know?
Well, absolutely. Which brings up the point that that's what every one of the traits and the characteristics that are contained in the books. It's to identify all of those areas, and we should do that with every area. On the area of forgiveness, there are some actual benefits that come to us when we learn to forgive. One of them is the peace of mind and the tranquility. Instead of having a lot of anxiety and frustration in our lives, we look at life differently. There's reduced stress, reduced anxiety, and it's been proven that when you are relaxed and positive, when positive energy is flowing, you're a healthier person.
Mhm.
When you have things stored up in your body, when energy is not flowing, you're going to experience stomach trouble or arthritis or trouble with your joints, or things are going to express themselves in your body if you have emotional and other problems that are operating. So you're just going to feel better. You're going to approach life better. Life is going to be happier and more fulfilling for you if you can reap the benefits of forgiveness. And there's a mental health, there's an emotional health. And as we started out with the Christian principles, there's a direct tie in with divinity and universal law, that when you forgive, you come closer to that divine construct, what was designed in the creation, and you become more spiritual, more spiritually attuned to things, and you can see things with more clarity. And the more you develop good characteristics, the more you're able to develop good characteristics. Your capacity to grow increases. And it's just a wonderful way to live. Everything that you hold, every blockage, every negative energy decreases your capacity in some way. And so if you have traits that are bad traits, you're going to decrease as a person. Your effectiveness in all that you do will decrease, and people do not want to be around you, and your opportunities will decrease, and your world will just be different. And if you're a positive, loving, forgiving person, then all of those blessings will flow into your life. You'll meet people who are on that same vibrational level. Like attracts like, and opportunities will open up before you, and this will happen, and synchronicities here and synchronicities there. Your life will just be more pleasant and enjoyable if forgiveness is part of your characteristic. So I think in this week, I know our time is short, we should look for ways in which we are restricted in our energy flow. If we have bad feelings toward anyone, we need to bring those up and resolve them. We need to communicate. We need to release our baggage. We need to reconstruct our life so that it's positive and encouraging. We don't want to put people on trial with our questions. We want to phrase our things in such a way that they can respond and not feel threatened. And life just flows smoothly as the energy flows. And it's just a different world if we don't carry around all of this baggage and animosity toward people. Just forgive them and love them.
So as we leave today, because our time is up, excuse me, and I want to thank you guys for joining us. We are reading from the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn. If you didn't get your copy, get it already. But our assignment for this week then, if we are listening to Omuugn, is to do an energy check. When you come in contact with anyone, stop and do a quick energy check. Excuse me. How do I feel about this person? And are we good? And then be the first to apologize if something is not quite right, so that you are setting the tone for having a great relationship and then attracting more of that into your life. Did I get it right?
That's good information. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, cool. All right. So until we meet again next week, let's be the best version of ourselves. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you guys for joining us. This was awesome. And pick up your copy of the book so that you can catch up if you haven't already. Thanks again.